2 seconds. What Nick said. While the dog's emotions are less complex, their emotions are chemically identical. Yes,
Yes.
that is 110% correct. That is money, like nail on the head. J Dubs, people are too. Yes, that doesn't necessarily mean the live is incorrect.
Yeah, so I explain that all the time when people bring up love. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, dogs get the same dopamine and chemicals that the good feeling chemicals that we get with love, right? They still get the same chemicals, but love is an extremely complex human emotion that dogs don't fully understand. What they understand is this feels really, really good.
Like it.
Value of the emotion may be different to creatures, however, the satisfaction that scratches their brain is the same. Yeah, I'd say about that. Like it's the satisfaction's probably the same. Yeah, I would definitely say that username. It just comes down to the emotion of it is what's going on. But basically, the long and the short of the situation is people come out and say that dogs have unconditional love. And I think Nick was I heard Nick say it first. And sorry, Nick, if you're in here, please correct me because I'm gonna fucking butcher this. Dogs will go out of their way to seek. Oh, I'm sorry, man. I'm mentally blanking. I'm going to need you to either jump up and say it or type it out for me. But they seek something and avoid. They seek pleasure and avoid discomfort. That's it. They seek pleasure and avoid discomfort. So they seek pleasure, avoid discomfort. So they're finding factors that benefit themselves, that make themselves feel better, that makes themselves feel good. They're going to avoid discomfort. So, like if they're not getting things that benefit them, they're going to leave. They're going to move away from it. That's just the way that dogs work. That's not
Which
saying
is
they're
okay.
bad, not saying they're
That's
wrong.
perfectly okay.
And that's how people work.
Yeah, 110%. And again, that's not saying that dogs are bad or dogs are not good or anything like that. It's just saying that dogs are motivated by things that benefit themselves. They don't have unconditional love.
See, I don't know about that. And I'm just going to say, if you've ever had a relationship or had somebody in your life that was like, say, a really confirmed narcissist or a sociopath or something like that, the pattern is that they're only there and affectionate with you or interact with you when they can get something from you. And any other time, they ignore you. And that's a clear sign of somebody who really doesn't care about you, who's just using you. And if that was true amongst dogs, they would only be affectionate to you and stuff when they needed something.
Okay,
So when they're affectionate towards you, it has been proven that they have a dopamine release, right? It's a feel-good chemical, and so when they're affectionate towards you, they're getting something out of it.
I'm sorry. It's
Yeah, and everyone else is
also
too.
what's it called? It starts with C. No, it's not C. It's
Cortisol.
oxytocin.
Cortisol.
Oxytocin.
Yeah, when they get they get an oxytocin release from interaction with people. When they get pats, when they get affection, when they get love, when they get all that sort of stuff, that is a benefit to them. So a classic example of what I mean by there is no unconditional love. If you get a dog, right, and I'm not saying to do this, you put it in a backyard with no other stimuli, no food, no water, no shelter, no interaction. Unconditional love would be that dog will wait for you to come back with none of those in play.
Actually, some of them do. It's amazing how loyal dogs will be to people who treat them unfairly.
Okay, but again...
Okay, if somebody did that to you, would you exactly be affectionate to them after that?
Well, you're not a dog. We're humans.
We're humans, but you wouldn't
I'm not a dog to start with.
Okay,
but
you
what
would
I'm
not.
saying
If
to you,
somebody did just left you out someplace, locked you in a basement for hours on end, you're not going to exactly be having much love for that person either.
You know how many times that I've had relationships with friends or family where I wasn't treated up to a decent standard that I still went out of my way to make sure that they were good?
Yeah, I know a lot of dogs.
I'm a human. I'm not a dog.
But a lot of dogs will be like that too. They put up with a lot of crap from people. All I gotta say is, if you want an example, lock your wife and your dog in the trunk for a couple hours and see who's happy to see you when you open it up.
Again, you're comparing humans to dogs. Okay, so So let's put this on a different aspect, right? You said a lot of dogs will put up with a lot of crap. Absolutely, absolutely, they'll put up with a lot of crap, and the ones that put up with a lot of crap are the ones that you have reinforced. You have created an association with positivity with that dog. For instance, you're feeding them, you're being affectionate towards them, you're doing all the things that they positively associate with, right? So when they're putting up with the crap, they're still seeing you as that thing that provides those resources that I like.
I would say a person's more likely to turn on you than a dog.
Probably, but that's
Yep.
because, again, people can have different emotions and stuff like that. You're anthropomorphizing dogs again. So
They
what
see.
I'm saying by unconditional love is get a puppy who's no other interactions in the world, hold it for 10, like interact with it for a little bit, then put it down and do what I said. It will bounce, it will bail, it will probably die before you interact with it again. But let's say in this magical circumstance, because I know people will be like, oh well, the puppy will just die. A dog that you've interacted with on a minimal level, so it knows who you are. Leave it alone for the 2 days, and then move on. Unconditional love would mean that no matter how long you left it for, no matter how much you didn't interact with it, that dog would come back. You would go down there, that dog would still be as excited to see you no matter how long you left it. It is just
Their
inherently untrue.
their affection towards you has conditions.
And most people too. And see, you're trying to compare like dogs can't love. This is what dogs do. But that you can put the same argument towards a human or
But
anybody, any
again,
creature.
we're not talking about humans, mate, because people don't walk in and say humans unconditionally love. They do that with dogs, which is why the live exists.
Well, maybe there's some people who do that. No, there is condition, and but I think dogs put up with more from people than they should. Maybe it's because they're unaware. They don't know. They can't go online and see. Hey, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be treated that way. You know, they don't know
Thank
anything.
you.
But so
Yeah,
Awesome.
do
So
children.
absolutely,
Look at children.
100%.
Look at children. They'll have crappy ass parents that abuse them, and yet they're still very loving to their parents until
yep.
And
somebody
those
treats them
people
better.
eventually, and those people are like me, where contact your parents eventually in life.
Right. I mean, I was one of those. My mother cared more about booze and partying than she did me. When I was real little, she was still my everything. But once my grandparents took over, I'm like, what the hell? I don't care that you're my mother. So I don't have
Yeah.
unconditional love. Although she's still my mother and she's no longer here with us. God rest her soul. I hope there was something wrong with her. And I hope she's sorted it out in the afterlife.
What's up, guys?
What
Hey,
you got,
Nick,
Nick?
what's going on, man?
What's up, buddy? So I think that the issue, at least the issue that I have with this conversation, typically, um, is like it tends to get framed as like a scientific discussion based on like what we know about dog behavior, and it's really not. Like it's completely a philosophical thing, right?
110%.
So like the question is like, can dogs feel love, right? It would get down to brass tacks. If like my home just like burst into flames right now, would my dog abandon me and leave me behind and like bust his way out a window to get out of a burning house? Or would he stay with me? Obviously that depends on the dog. If my dog stays with me, then the question that we're asking is that is that an emotional thing or is that like a low intelligence thing?
I would say it's a survival thing.
My German
Or is
Shepherd
it
would
maybe a
stay with me.
conditioned thing?
I would say it's a survival
stress.
thing.
I would say it's a stress thing. This shit's going sideways. This thing is familiar to me, so I'm going to chill with this thing, and he'll get me out of the situation.
Yep, survival.
Oh, you remember when they had that mass unaliving in the theater where all those guys took off and left their wives and kids in the theater? Well, they took off and ran for cover. I mean,
But yeah, 110%. This is a philosophical discussion.
people,
It's not based on science or anything like
I
that.
think there's a lot of people that are incapable of, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of people who are. I hate to say it, but it's absolutely true that it's
Well, sure, and like
time.
in those guys' defense, like we talked about this earlier before you were in here, I think, where like humans do have like certain like base instincts that they're obligated to at least try to adhere to, and we're like kind of removed from those at this point because of like capitalism and modern society and shit. So like a dude that runs into a house to like save children from a house fire, right? Sure, like
Yeah.
he could have like consciously decided to do that, but at the same time, he also knows that there's an objective benefit to pulling those children out of that house before they burn.
Yeah.
Right? And the community and society in general will benefit from him doing that.
Hmm. Yeah, but he's probably just thinking of the moment, those poor kids.
Right.
He's probably not analyzing society. He's probably thinking to himself, oh my God, there's kids in that house.
Well, right.
And, it's like...
that's my point. Like, that's exactly what he's saying. And people are like, oh, well, that's selfless. I'm like, well, no. Like, the society benefiting from him pulling those kids out of the house is the reason that we have that instinct, right?
Okay, so you have to look at it like this. Okay, when we say it's selfless, we're talking about on an individual basis, right? So he acted not because of society, not because of anything else other than the fact that there was somebody else in there that he went and acted on, right?
Sure.
So at that moment, he wasn't thinking about anything else like that. So that act to him individually was a selfless act. Even though society benefited from it, even though those kids benefited from it, to him, he wasn't doing anything to benefit himself at that moment.
Correct.
Yeah,
All I'm saying is that if there was no objective benefit to society or the community as a whole, he wouldn't have even thought to do that.
Yeah,
Exactly, and I'm agreeing with Nick because those instincts wouldn't exist unless, of course, they were they were put in. Like, we are genetically disposed to protect our young because our young carry on our society, like
Just
the
like
species
dogs are-
society, whatever you want to put it.
Right, just like dogs are genetically predisposed. Jesus, thank you. to do certain things because we selectively bred them to do certain things and we killed the ones that couldn't. Right, and I think after we found out, and we've known this for a long time, like I said earlier, like we have different levels of emotions, right? But we have like basically the same base emotions, and they're chemically identical if you look at it like on a brain scan. Right. Yeah. So to say that because like evolution or selective breeding has kind of made them kind of dumb or taken their self-preservation away, I think it'd be kind of silly to say that, well, because of that, they just like have lost any semblance of emotional intelligence.
I'm not saying dogs are emotionally unintelligent. I think dogs can be extremely emotionally intelligent. I hate the argument that where people go, my dog loves me unconditionally. My dog just loves me, and blah 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 blah. No, dogs, and like I said, I credited you with this because you fucking put it perfectly. Dogs will naturally go away from discomfort and move towards something that makes them feel good. That's why they hang out with you. They don't.
I mean, they're not as emotionally. You can have emotional intelligence as a species without being as complex as human emotional complexity, right? So yeah, I'm not saying that they're emotionally dumb. What I'm saying is that it's very, very bad for dog husbandry to say that they are unconditionally love us, right? Because that sets up the groundwork for being able to neglect, being able to abuse the situation, because the dog's just going to unconditionally love you. Right, we need to understand dogs at a baseline and to actually train them appropriately as well.
And that's fair. That's a fair point.
And that's what the reason for this topic. This topic is not to tell people that, oh, dogs are bad. You should never own a dog because dogs are selfish. They're using you. That's not the point. The point is so that way we can set more people up to understand the behavior at a baseline, so that way we can actually train them accordingly.
Yeah. Well, my other issue with it kind of is I don't see the benefit to like approaching somebody that says that my dog loves me and telling them, well, actually, they don't really love you. They just want food.
Oh, I'm not going around in public telling them that.
Well, I understand that.
This is live, and the thing is, here's the difference between that, right? I'm not going up to people telling them that. I have a topic on a live, and people join my live, and then they can ask questions or debate or whatever they want, but they're the ones that get to do that. I'm not going up to them and saying, hey, you know?
Well, I'd hope not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that's what religious
I'm not
people
saying
do.
it's like walking up to random people on the street telling them that their chihuahua only hangs out with them because they have kibbles and bits. But like I just don't see the benefit to like disproving the idea that dogs feel love.
I mean, okay, if we look at it that way, then we can say that for almost anything scientific, right? What's the benefit of disproving this? To learn more about it, to understand it better, right?
Right. Well, I mean, dogs are, you go back in history, only a couple hundred years, they were pack animals, and you become a part of their pack. You can call that what you want, but their loyalty is pretty intense. I think most dogs are more loyal than they should be.
I mean, I look at this live and I argue the whole unconditional love thing purely from a perspective of my job, because I'm aware of the training and stuff that goes into our dogs. And the reason I like when we talk about the whole unconditional love thing, where I'm like, it's just not true, is because most people will turn around and go, my dog will protect me because it loves me. And that's where I sort of come at it from, is the dog
Oh,
doesn't
for sure. Like that.
the dog.
Absolutely, that is not a good way to look at dogs.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and that's just the way that I look at it. That's the reason I joined this live, and I'm like, hey, you guys need to understand that your dogs, they love you, they feel love, blah 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 blah. But it's not an unconditional thing. Your dog is not going to throw itself in front of a bullet to save your life, just because you exist.
Yep.
Right.
And my aspect of this is a little different. The reason why I do this is more for a training standpoint.
Well, in a training standpoint, you have to break things down very scientifically.
Oh yeah, yeah. And if we look at dogs that are only motivated by factors that benefit themselves, then we can start breaking it down scientifically and look at the depth of operant conditioning, for example.
But if a dog
Citation needed, D.
saw you being harassed or something like that, or they thought you were threatened, and they see you as just scientifically as their resources, they might rip someone apart to protect you because they're protecting their resource. And if you want to break it down that simple and all, because I mean, I've got a German Shepherd and she's intense. She's intense.
And-
I
and
worry
so, like-
about her biting people.
They,
To that point, and Greg will probably agree with me on this. Like there's a like in the pet dog training thing, we talk a lot about resource guarding and how it's a dangerous behavior, and like you need to like get a handle on that shit
Right.
really quick. But when you're training like protection dogs, they call it possession, and it's generally
a good thing. We want possession.
Yeah.
We want them, like when they have the sleeve when they're a pup. You want them to wrap their friggin' paws around it and hold on to it, because we can take that into prey drive and fight drive and all that sort of stuff. So
right.
it depends on the whole thing with training, the whole thing with animal training, the whole thing with dog training is it really comes down to what aspect in the world you're training on, whether you're a pet dog trainer, whether you're a protection dog trainer, whether you're a working dog trainer, whether you're whatever. It's all different things. But yes, you are 110% right, Nick. We do encourage resource guarding in big air quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
So and like sure, like you said, the dog is definitely protecting you because it's a resource, right? Or because you're a resource.
Good
I
afternoon.
do not necessarily think that precludes it from any sort of from a strong emotional bond.
Are you ready for science?
Yes, Hellbound.
Are you
Okay,
gonna show
so-
the image?
The hypothalamus of the brain is what is responsible for the area that lights up when we feel love, when we see somebody that we love, right? Dog's hypothalamus is more than half the size of a human's. Therefore, what we feel within love and so on and so forth, we're not talking about dopamine release, because a dog can feel dopamine release looking at a fucking squirrel. Dopamine release isn't the only thing that happens during love, so they call it the love drug, and then they amount that to the same thing. But a dog looking at a fucking empty cheese wrapper releases dopamine. The bigger thing is when you look at the areas of the brain that release things like dopamine, and then the hypothalamus, which you're looking at, which is the core to where, quote unquote, the feeling of love comes from. Half the size means that it'll never be as intense as ours. So they can have strong bonds. They can.
How's that quantified?
They can have familial relations out of genetic desire or need, survival need. But the way that we feel love is uncomparable to a dog's.
How is that quantified?
What do you mean?
I mean, like how are you saying it's less intense because like the
So when you're looking
hypothalamus
at
is half the size of a
in and
human's?
itself, there's less neurons per centimeter. So therefore,
Right.
there's less firing, there's less size, there's less intensity. Like if you look at something like a killer whale, they have larger hypothalamus than we do. So therefore, it's been directly related that their bonds are far stronger than ours. And with that being said, we've seen there's studies that have shown that something like we would quite literally fall into a black hole if we felt the way that something like a whale does because of the size of the hypothalamus. So when you're looking at size differentiates, you start to see differences like where if you look at the hypothalamus of something like trying to think of like a different
Right, but
species.
if we're talking about people and whales and dogs, like this is fundamentally apples and oranges.
Well, correct. But what we're talking about is anatomical differences that would create a direct relation to behavior mechanisms and survival instincts. So when we're looking at those, we start to see things like so another good one is the frontal cortex, which is responsible for executive function. So making impulsive, shitty decisions. When that area of the brain becomes damaged, we'll see common behaviors in people, which is erratic, irrational behavior, involuntary behavior, such. And dogs are very naturally impulsive creatures.
Right.
You see it in high drive dogs. So dogs in and of themselves have a smaller frontal cortex, which is directly related to impulse control. We are higher sentient beings. Doesn't mean that dogs are not sentient. They have the parts of the brain that are required.
Right. And I'm saying like the structure and brain size relative to the body
So
size is
that's
not
what
really super that important, right? We test selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors on mice
correct. But
before
I
we
do
give them to
think that it
people.
does have a direct correlation when you're talking about both psychology and
I don't think it
anatomical
has a
behavior.
direct correlation to anything that cannot be reasonably quantified in a manner that is
So,
universal, right? And
but
you
if
can't
we're
do that with
talking,
something like love.
right, but we're human beings talking about something like love, which means we have to consider that our version of love is never going to be the same as a dog's, just like our
For
version
sure.
of love will never be the same as a whale's because of the
Totally different.
differences. So that's where I'm coming in, is from a different position. It's saying when we use the word love, we mean it very differently. And that's where it's a semantics issue. I think that's really
Totally.
what my point to be made was, the semantics, because somebody will argue dogs love, but another person can argue, well, they don't love the same as us. They'll never love us the same. And that's where you get into the selfish, versus selfless, and self-preservation versus, so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
I think it's just getting into a semantics thing and understanding that the root of it would be that by anatomical difference and neuron difference, they likely do not feel the same love that we do. They definitely could feel a form of love, but they don't necessarily carry something like hate. They
Ooh,
don't
Tori with
necessarily
the big
carry the
fat.
same thing as love, but they do carry forms of that.
Well, right. And so, like, I would also say that, like, sure, it can be fundamentally different. And, like, if you're comparing them objectively, if we were able to do that, and you said that it wasn't as intense or wasn't as complex as it was for a person, in a dog's brain, then sure, that could be entirely true. But, like, on the individual, like, subjective level, I think it's just as important for dogs as it is for
Oh,
us.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, and they're absolutely social creatures that
Yes,
even
Casey, this is all
significantly.
speculation.
Yeah. Well, and like for me, I'm just coming from a place of like, you're looking at textbook and looking at, anatomical differences and such, and looking at, whatever. This is just an hypothesis coming off of multiple different research studies pouring together to create one, essential thesis of this, which would be that dogs do feel love, just in a different caliber than we do. But yeah, so I think, like I said, I think it's just a semantics thing. I think
Oh, 100%.
yeah, it's not for lack of, it's just, but like I said, you see it even in like feral communities where you'll have like communal feeding grounds and such, and there's respect, but they do still create bonds. That's like familial love we see, and familial love or familial relation or familial connection bond that we see between maternal instinct and offspring, that still is required by nature to nurture those offspring and guarantee their survival. So they do
Right.
feel that.
I feel like if we take this entire conversation to its logical conclusion, we're basically discussing whether or not free will exists.
Absolutely. I do genuinely, well, right. But I do, because that's a nature versus nurture thing, right? And I think how maternal behavior in dogs, so offspring to mother, is very little different between us to dog, because the same way that a puppy relies on its mother for nutrients and safety and warmth, does a dog rely on us for the same thing. All we're doing is transfer and delaying the separation. So normally you'd have it where, let's say, a feral dog would move off from its mother, go on and create its own dynamic, so reproduction and offspring and so on. We're prolonging that by taking them directly from the mother and then creating the same bond, and we're kind of stepping in place and becoming a surrogacy.
So, as far as free will exists in dogs, absolutely. That's why dogs can display unwanted behaviors, and all dog training is, when using operant and classical conditioning, is manipulation of that behavior, so that way we can change where they make those decisions, right? So, yeah, free will does exist, absolutely.
Absolutely, and they're sentient beings. We see it between a dog that takes something over the next.
Yeah.
And in self-preservation, we see it when a dog says, "This isn't my best interest," and they stop doing the thing. That's free will. That's a choice. They're not compulsed into doing it or not doing it.
110%.
But in the
110%,
foundation
like
of that is, even in compulsion training, that is free will. The dog could choose to just shut down and not do it, period. And the dog ends up kind of, in a sense, faltering and doing it anyways.
Yeah, so to further push this and stuff, yeah, free will exists, but dogs' free will, that their decision-making capabilities, the cognitive functions, is not morally based. They don't have any moral agents.
Right.
Sure.
There's no societal pressure or gender role or anything like that creates this, reinforcement of how they fall, where they fall. You're not going to have a German Shepherd that's born that goes, "I'm going to be in the military."
Yeah. So as far as that goes, with the lack of moral compass, that's where it circles back around that dogs are only motivated by factors that benefit themselves.
You know what's a good question or a good point? So I have read so many studies, and it's my favorite fascination because of the ongoing scheme of people anthropomorphizing and relating children to dogs. And it's been already stated in many studies that an adult dog has relatively equal to the capacity of a 4-year-old child. So we see a lot of the same behaviors in 2 to 3-year-olds and children we see in young adults and adolescents, the teenage phase, we call it, the terrible 2, terrible 3, same thing. But it's really fascinating to watch that kind of progression in the way that it still works very similarly. And you'll see the same kind of selfishness and self-satisfying behaviors in young children we'll see in dogs. You wouldn't say the 4-year-old's going to run into a burning building and save anybody else other than itself, just like a dog wouldn't do the same.
Well, so there's kind of the difference, but I don't know if you were in here when I brought this up earlier, is like, if my house just like suddenly burst into flames, is my dog going to like stay with me, or is he going to abandon me and like fucking bust the window out to get out of the house fire?
If your dog has any level of self-preservation, it's going to just leave.
Right, but like dogs have been specifically selected to not have that self-preservation because we need them to do that. So there's a pretty good chance that my dog's gonna be like, "No, I'm gonna stay with this guy because you know."
But you gotta also think about that. Okay, self-selected and stuff. They're not gonna just naturally do that. They're gonna be paid to do that. We train them to do that. That's any dog that risks their own life are doing it because we paid them at one point to learn to do that behavior. So the whole aspect of it is that they're doing it because they expect payment eventually, right? So there's that. And then on the other aspect of things is even a dog that was not selectively bred for that, and a dog that doesn't just burst out a window and run. If there's an intense situation, like let's say a house fire, like you were mentioning, that the dog is super stressed and their survivability kicks in and they stay with you, it's because they're trying to utilize you to survive. You're the comfort zone. You're the thing that is going to push keep them safe in their eyes, right? So it's one of those options for sure, but when it really comes down to it, it's anything that benefits themselves at some point.
Sure, but like there's
I'm sorry. I am gonna go ahead and drop. I'm getting sleepy, and when I'm sleepy, I start saying stupid shit. So I'm gonna go to bed.
No problem. You have a good sleep.
You too.
Later, Hannah.
Day.
I love these. Bye, Hannah. I love these discussions with Nick specifically because I feel like we get into the bigger shit and the nitty gritty versus the basic,
Oh, absolutely.
discussion.
No,
I
that's
love
why
getting
I was
on
like,
fucking
yes, Nick's coming up, and I knew you were coming up because you were going to talk some science to us, and I love that. That's why I have these topics more so at a very, very baseline level to open up these deeper
You
conversations.
know what's funny? How many times I've for now over a year been in lives with Nick, and I'll get comments, and Nick I'm sure remembers them. I get comments about people being like, saying, I don't know, something negative, or that he's being a shit starter or a troll, or he's being argumentative. And I'm like, no, Nick doesn't talk like this because he has some motive. He's talking like this to open up the conversation and bring up an opposing conversation,
absolutely.
right? I mean, it's not, there's no malice behind it. It's
Yeah, I think
you
that gets
gotta
missed a lot. And to
Yep.
be fair, like I make it easy to miss a lot of the times, especially when I like refuse to come in the box and stay in the chat.
So you are a little bit of a shit starter.
Nah, well,
for sure.
people can say the same about me because my topics, but every single time somebody sticks around long enough, they'll realize that I'm coming from, most of the time, pretty unbiased. I'm willing to learn and stuff and broaden my horizons if I'm wrong about something. And it's really more to open up conversation, educate, and things like that. So we can talk about things on a more in-depth level to educate. So yeah, I mean, people can say I'm a shit starter until they stick around long enough.
So rather a shit stirrer, not a shit starter.
Yes. They actually, I was told that earlier.
I just found this pot of shit. I just thought it needed a good stir because it was getting kind of stagnant.
Yeah, absolutely. We gotta smell it better.
Stick my spoon in there and
And,
move it around a little bit. Make sure it's not stuck to
I
the
saw,
pot.
I saw Nick come in, and I'm like, yes, this is gonna be fun.
Like, and it's no, of course, it's no drag against anybody who is, in the earlier stages of education, or they're still learning, or whatever the case is, or even if they're seasoned and they're pretty steady in their opinions and their thoughts. But I always say it's really, really healthy to have these conversations. And I always do say, if you're coming into the dog world, if you do not come in with an open mind and willing for adaptivity, you are going to fail. Everybody is going to fight you, and the only thing that two trainers are going to agree on is that the third is wrong.
Yep.
So there's no way you're going to flounder in this community if you aren't willing to at least hear somebody else's opinion and be adaptable, because education is ever changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So username says dismissing and belittling should have a place in debates. No, it shouldn't. If you're dismissing and belittling, then at that point, you have nothing to debate. You have no argument. You have nothing, right? It's a fallacy in debates.
Yep. The first person to yell or to insult in an argument has lost. That's because they know they've lost and they have no other way to gain something up on the other person. There's nobody's learning. It's not a debate and it's not a discussion. That's an altercation. That's a fight. That's all that person is there for, and nobody learns in that conversation.
So yeah, so with that said, I do have to log out of the live.
Yeah.
All right, you have a good night, dude.
I conversated.
Ah, man.
Yeah, you're good. I'm gonna get off here. Listen to the podcast. It's funny.